Well, thank you, everybody, for coming and watching the film this evening. I'm not sure where I've got to hide here. They obviously think I'm a child, but I'm going to sit in it. What I want to say is one of the great pleasures of making documentaries is that you get to meet people who are incredibly inspiring and really do reach the heights of their profession in terms of the respect that you accord them when you meet them. And I think everybody on this stage is somebody that, if you're interested in crime, if you're interested in justice, these are truly people who should be celebrated because they really do strive to tell the truth, bring these stories to the wider public, and see that justice is served. So I'd like really to thank you all for coming tonight. And there's a gentleman in the audience who I think also deserves a round of applause, and that's Nick Castry, the son of Ronald Castry, for telling that story. Thank you, Nick. So I'll start with Louise. Louise, obviously, you've dedicated your professional life to looking at these stories of miscarriages of justice. What is it that really strikes you about this particular case that really touches your heart and moves you, and also is a story that needs to be told to the wider world?
Well, it was always a case for me when I was a teenager and I was growing up and learning and listening about these sorts of cases that was always there. You know, it was people would often refer to Stefan Kisko's case, and I got to hear of the work that Campbell Malone had done, and then that Trevor had done in the investigation. And I suppose the thing that really grabbed me about it was the idea that there was a very strong bond between mother and son, and that the mum had fought so hard to be able to try and find the evidence that would clear her son, but they were just in the dark and they couldn't sort of find their way through to get that piece of evidence. But it was the idea that so many people kept on fighting for so long to try and find the truth, but that took a long time coming.
And indeed, the person who fought as hard as the family is the gentleman on the end there, Campbell Malone, the solicitor for Stefan Kisko. Campbell, thank you very much for doing this. I know you're a reluctant participant, but a man who truly is an inspiration to everybody in this field, and I know he's a name on the lips of many students across the country who ever look at these kinds of cases. So that's the first time you saw the film, Campbell. I'm doing the thing a filmmaker should never do, is ask, what did you think of it?
Do you want me to tell you about the things you got wrong, or...?
No, we'll do that off the stage.
Well, I think I just mentioned as we came up the stairs onto the stage, I feel like limp lettuce. I'm drained. I think it's obvious when you see the film how much impact it still has. Trevor, to my right here, is hard-bitten copper, but I could tell that he was as moved as I was on that film. It's an incredible story about incredible people, and I think the reason why Stefan's case resonates so much, okay, there were unusual things about him, but Stefan could be any mother's son. Could happen to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Trevor there. Trevor, a fantastic detective, hugely respected in the force. And as you said there, Campbell, it was clear to Trevor on the film that this case, if people have an idea of seasoned coppers, hard-bitten detectives, never feel anything, just get on with the job, this was a case that really touched you and you really strove to get to the bottom of what happened, didn't you?
Yeah, it gets more moving. I'd dealt with over 300 homicides of one sort of another. And I've had a lot of convictions for murders where a sexual influence has been there, including one of an 89-year-old woman who done by a serial sex offender. So they're there, and the trouble is, if you don't get the right person, they go on and commit more crime. The thing with this, when I picked the file up, it struck me immediately, why did they take a sample of semen? By that time, I'd been a detective for 21 years. I was a senior detective, I'd run murder inquiries, and I'd never known anybody be asked to provide a sample. I made inquiries at the forensic sciences, laboratories across the country, if anybody else had received one. And there's only ever been 2 at that time when I did the inquiry taken, and they were both taken by Dr. Tierney. And for the same result, that there was a lad going to be charged with a rape, and he identified that he had hypogonadism, and he proved that it wasn't him. So there's a lot of credit must go to his professionalism and his knowledge, and his willingness to stand up and do something different. I know the result of this case, he got a lot of criticism from certain circles to the extent that he stopped being a police surgeon, which was a great loss to West Riding Police. The immediate thing when I read the file was, why did they take that? Oh. The immediate thing was, why did they take the sample? So I interviewed Dr. Tierney, and he told me. Then he's getting people to accept that they've done something wrong, that there's a mistake in the system. But when you start digging, people like outreach to scientists refused to admit that he'd done any tests to see if he was looking for sperms. Yet he produced 16 slides and did a thing called centrifugal examination, which is what they use for vasectomies, so that they can give a certificate saying you're now azoospermic with safety, otherwise they get sued. So why did he do that? Dr. Tierney told me why he did that, because he told them, if the sperm head's on the body, he won't have done it. If there's none, this might help your conviction. He looked at it from both sides, not with one, just one, blank. But then it became evident that it wasn't Kisko. But could you get the QC dealing with it for us when I put the file into the Crown Prosecutor DP to accept it? He was saying there might have been 2 people there. I said, no, it's not going to be. Well, how do you know this testosterone hasn't made him suddenly produce sperm heads? Dr. Anderson, who was his endocrinologist, said it would be very doubtful, but he couldn't say 100% that it didn't. So I had to go up the chain of the science to find a man in Edinburgh University who is the world's renowned expert on all mammals' semen production. And he categorically said and can state, and he did do in the file, that it takes 11 weeks for a man to produce a sperm, the sperm head. Kisko had only had the injections 4 weeks, so they became irrelevant. So you could wipe that out, but there's still, the legal profession accepts it straight away.
That's right. And, you know, Dr. Tierney, again, this is one of the wonderful things about filmmaking is you learn very early on that there are 3 people you can always find in the phone book: lawyers, aristocrats, and doctors. And it was really that simple of tracking Dr. Tierney down. It's just going to the Rochdale phone book, and there he was. And it was absolutely extraordinary when you turned up, because we weren't sure whether you would. And you came in carrying documents, and you brought one of the files here tonight. This is a case, isn't it, that really has always remained close to you. And, you know, kind of professionally, you really did go. When, you know, you stretched every iota of the Hippocratic Oath, I think, when you did this case. And, you know, kind of it's... Stefan would have died, you know, kind of like in prison probably if you hadn't. So I think everybody would like to hear from you.
Well, I think the first thing is that Stefan was known as a gentle giant even then, although over the years it became more obvious. But when I went to examine Stefan and I was told that he was on testosterone and vitamin B, I then sat down and talked to him and said, look, Stefan, if in fact you had nothing to do with this, if you produce a specimen of semen and we send it off to the laboratory and it comes back that it is a spermatozoa, it will take you completely out of the frame. If, on the other hand, there is no spermatozoa in the specimen, then you are in the middle of the frame. And he agreed without any problems to produce that specimen. The next thing, I was asked to decide whether he was fit to be detained. And I said, yes, he was fit to be detained, but he should not get his testosterone injections. That was very important, because if he received testosterone injections, and if time went on, and maybe he could produce some sperm heads, then that would make it very difficult. So the police from West Yorkshire were advised that he he could have all his medication except his testosterone injections. The other thing is, when I went to the Crown Court in Leeds, as it was explained, I was met on the M62 junction 20 by a West Yorkshire patrol car, and I was whizzed, when I say up the motorway, at speeds and blue lights flashing until I got to the Crown Court. And from the once I got to the Crown Court, I then went straight upstairs, and I then was called to the witness box. The unfortunate thing is, and we all learn lessons, I should have actually asked the judge, could I ask a question? And that was about the seminal fluid. In not asking that question, in a sense, I was very responsible for him staying in prison. Now, I've also worked as a prison doctor, so I know what it's like when people like Stefan have been accused of murdering children. They end up most of their time in isolation, and of course that doesn't do their mental health any good. So it was a dreadful case. It is something that I will never forget. And when you are a forensic physician, you just don't trust anybody. You make sure that every step of the way, where you make recommendations, that you are prepared to go that little bit further.
And I've got a note in this file. Yeah. This is one of the most extraordinary things I've ever read. So after Dr. Tierney, all the work that he did, everything that he did that helped Stefan be proven to be an innocent man, the thanks that he was given, that this notice was placed in police cabinets and police stations all across the county, and it said, Dr. Tierney is no longer the police surgeon. On no account must anybody contact him again. That is the thanks you got, isn't it, from the police at the time for what you did, which is absolutely extraordinary. And we'd really like to think that that sort of thing wouldn't happen now. Well, you've heard a little bit from the panel, but I think there's probably a good time now to pass the microphone to the audience. So is there anybody who'd like to ask a question? If there is, put up your hand, and I'll take this microphone, and we can give it to you. Okay? Can't see the hand there. All right.
Cheers, thanks. Firstly, fantastic and amazing and moving, thank you. And secondly, it seems like the seeds for injustice are sown in blind faith, in this case in police, courts, judges, etc. And of course, now we live in a very different world, post-pace, internet, artificial intelligence. But we have still blind faith in so much to do. Where do you think injustice and miscarriages of justice can happen now? Because they're not going to happen in the same way as they did in the past. Where do we have to be alert to now in a very different world?
Was that for me?
For anybody.
Okay, I'll start off. I'll give you my tuppence worth, and then pass over perhaps to others. For me, we have a significant problem in this country right now with disclosure. So there is a duty on the police and prosecutors to hand over anything to the defence which can undermine the prosecution case or could support the defence case. And we know full well from HM inspectorate reports that have been done in fairly recent times that disclosure is not taking place. So that very, very deep-rooted safeguard that we have to make sure that we level the playing field and the defence can get a safe the defendant can get a safe trial is not happening because that sort of disclosure is not being made appropriately. There are also significant problems in this country with evidence being lost. So I've worked on a number of cases in very recent times where scientific evidence now could objectively tell us whether or not the person in prison is guilty as they've been convicted. And yet evidence is either goes missing, it's not retained properly, even though there's legal statutory duty to do so. And if it is retained, it's very often not being released to defence teams by the police force who have it. So there are significant problems, and I think what Campbell said at the end of the documentary, that it's more likely to happen now, is absolutely true. Not particularly because of the case types, but because the very significant threats to funding that we've had to police forces and to legal aid have been sustained over a long period of time now. Campbell, do you want to add?
Yeah, I echo that. I should just put in a caveat. I mean, it's over 10 years since I've been retired, but I do follow things and I keep in touch with my former colleagues. And it was getting bad by the time I left. But it seems to have got progressively worse. I think there's a problem on both sides with resources. I think there's been although efforts have been made to improve the number of police in the last couple of years, over the last decade, there's been a substantial shortfall. From what I've seen of my own profession, more and more lawyers are turning away from doing legal aid, criminal defence work. When I started trying to help Charlotte, initially it was Charlotte rather than Stefan, I was working as a fairly busy criminal lawyer, doing entirely defence work and entirely legal aid work. But we were paid reasonably well. You know, I could find the time in and amongst my other work to take on something like Stefan's case. And I admit now that when I started, I didn't have a bloody clue what I was doing. The idea of working on just the concept of miscarriage of justice was novel. By the time I left, the problems in legal aid were getting increasingly severe, and people were trying to find ever more inventive ways of making a living. As I understand it now, it's got even worse, and certainly there's been no increases. Thank God I wasn't able to open the bottle. There's been no increases in legal aid rates since way before I retired. So people are going out of the profession. They've not got time to devote to these cases. So my worries are from two ends. One is that I think, notwithstanding the changes that have occurred in things like PACE, the development of DNA, etc., the potential for wrongful convictions will remain. The other side of it is that overturning it is going to get ever more difficult. People can't find the time to do it. There aren't the young lawyers coming through, perhaps who feel energized to do it. In some of Louise's other programs, she's demonstrated how difficult it is to get hold of forensic material. Back in the day, one knew where to go to. Now, it's difficult to know who is responsible, if anybody is responsible, for retaining key and critical information. So I think, yes, the risk is because of issues like disclosure, because of the lack of trained lawyers on both sides, wrongful convictions will reoccur. And I very much fear the chances of those wrongful convictions being overturned are a lot more remote than they were.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to answer a question?
Yeah, when you're on disclosure, if you take Stefan's case, the inquiry didn't run for very long, but they managed to gain 16,000 statements, 5,000 vehicle inquiries. You start with disclosure and that, there's no solicitor or barrister with all goodwill will sit down and go through it. They're not paid enough to do it, and they've not got the inclination or really know what they're looking for. Holmes has changed a lot of it where it's all computerised and you can actually sift it out. But disclosure is documents given in two forms, one relevant and one non-relevant. And as soon as the police declare a statement non-relevant, the vast majority of lawyers won't even look at them. So it's not just that they're not disclosed, because now they're just panned bundles. It's the way they describe them. And have a barrister and a solicitor got the time to wade through 16,000 statements? And on other inquiries, it gets even bigger. That's where the crunch comes, is if you want to hide something, it is quite easy, unfortunately.
Wow. Any other questions, please?
Yes, I have a question, please.
Yeah, 1 second.
I think Dr. Tierney just wanted to add an answer to that last one, if you may.
The biggest problem that I found when I was a forensic physician was that the police really believed that we were working on their behalf, trying to convince them that we were an independent practitioner searching for evidence, whether it convicted or it removed any chance of a court case, was not really tolerated. And many, many times I tried to tell them that I'm not working for you, I am working for the prisoner.
Okay. This gentleman here would like to say something.
Thank you. Dr. Tierney, for 48 years, I have held a belief that you were complicit in the conviction of Stefan Kisko. Tonight, I would unreservedly apologise to you for what I've seen tonight. I worked with his aunt, his mother's sister, for a short time, and it has been an emotional and revealing experience tonight to watch this film. And it has troubled me for many, many years about his conviction and the role of the police. And if anyone can remember the programme Life on Mars, I think that was the time then that people used, that the police were taken as what they said was right. It's now been proved that that wasn't the case. So, Dr. Tierney, I apologise profusely.
Thank you very much. And I think, again, that demonstrates the power of the documentaries and the people involved in them. Time for one more question. Anybody got anything else they'd like to ask? Yep. Sorry, can I just get them there? Sorry.
Hi, I just want to say it's been so moving seeing this documentary, and you're all so inspiring in your roles. And I just wanted to hear just a little bit about what was your vocation to be in your profession, because people like you are so valuable and important in society, and you go through so much pressure and you fight for justice. So I'd just love to hear a little soundbite. I'd love to hear longer from each of you about what it is that made you choose this profession and stay.
For me, it's caring for people. I find it very, very hard at the moment to understand what's going on with doctors, nurses, etc. It is caring for people, and it's being there when you need it. That's all I can say.
For me, it was the power of investigative journalism. When I was a teenager, I grew up watching Rough Justice, the BBC Strand, which I went to work on. And I found it utterly amazing that you would have a picture of a case that had been presented to a jury, that turned out to be false in some way, misleading in some way, and that journalists would have been the people that would come along and expose that truth. So for me, it was the power of investigative journalism within the justice system, and something which I'm very sorry to say, investigative journalism has really turned its back on. There are no programmes out there right now which are actively investigating cases of people who are in prison right now, and the British journalism as a scene should hang its head in shame for that, because it's absolutely needed, and people should be doing that kind of work.
My motivation in progressing in the police and going into the CID was to find the truth, to trace the truth, and trace the real offenders to protect the public from further offences.
I've looked back recently as to why I became a lawyer, and I think back in the day it was easy to get into do a law degree. The A levels were much easier, and I had no idea what lawyers did. And two of my granddaughters here, one of them a little while ago said that she wanted to be a criminal lawyer, and I'm not sure about that, whether it's a good idea. I think she may be having second thoughts anyway. But with me, it was, look, I tried to get, after I did my degree and did my training, my solicitor's exams, I tried to get a job as what we called an article clerk, and a trainee solicitor. And I went for 3 interviews, and the last one was with a small firm, legal aid firm in Salford. Two youngish partners, both very progressive, and it was the biggest stroke of luck I ever had. And I learned what real people's real lives were about working in Salford. And I worked in Salford or areas like that for the rest of my working life. I didn't take on Stefan's case out of any idealism. I believed in what I did, but I took it on because I was asked to by a friend who had acted for Charlotte. And again, it's one of the most fortunate things I ever did. It changed my life. I was interviewed after the case was over, and I said something like, well, I can't imagine that there aren't other people like Stefan in prison who shouldn't be there. And within a couple of days, I'd had a letter from a prisoner asking me to take over his case, and I did his case successfully. It was the first time I worked with Michael Mansfield. And shortly after that case, Michael introduced me to somebody else. And I found that I gradually spent the rest of my life doing these sort of cases. And it's something that's been, frankly, a privilege. I teased David about the mistakes in the film. There aren't any. It was a brilliant film. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity of working on it. It's powerfully reminded us of the way lives are destroyed by a miscarriage of justice. 3 families had their lives destroyed by this murder and this wrongful conviction. And it could have happened to anybody. And that's why I'm very glad that you gave me the opportunity of fulfilling my promise to Charlotte, not to let people forget what happened to Stefan.
And we're very grateful that you did it. Thank you.